I just brought a few slides. I didn't know what to prepare for this group, so I asked Noel, and he said, just tell some stories. So I brought a few stories, and given the missions that are in the audience, the stories are focused on phase BCD. As you will see, Messenger's been flying a long time, but the phase Z stories are for another meeting. Messenger's a discovery mission. I think most of you know that. It was selected way, way back in the Precambrian, July 1999. Actually, it was in the days of faster, better, cheaper, which you guys will remember, maybe. We were selected the second time we proposed, and I'll talk about that a little bit, the same time as Deep Impact. And as Bill already mentioned, 1999 was an interesting few months right after our selection was announced. Within a week, the Discovery program had been removed from the NASA budget in the Congressional Appropriations Bill, and it didn't get restored for several months. So having been selected, we were without a program for a little while, but cooler heads prevailed on the Hill. I think all of you know that late 1999 saw the loss of the Mars 98 missions. So there was a sea change in risk tolerance at NASA headquarters. Phase B was 18 months, January 2000 to 2001. We have a pointer other than the one on my hand?
The one in my bag.
There's got to be some laser guys here, right? Is that point? Okay, thank you, sir. Yes, yes, yes. Cassini's always such a well-funded mission, you know that? Okay, we were confirmed in June 2001 by the current associate administrator in his earlier administration. And we had 3 years of phase CD. As a few of you in the audience will know, we need it every month. We launched almost 6 years ago, and we have a very complicated cruise trajectory lasting 6.6 years with 6 planetary flybys and 5 major propulsive maneuvers, so as to put us into position to achieve insertion into orbit around Mercury about 10.5 months from now. These were the broad challenges that we faced. Remember, it's a discovery mission, so it's smaller than most of the missions represented here. We had to carry a total delta V of 2,300 meters per second to do orbit insertion. So mass was our biggest enemy. We ended up launching with 55% propellant, but we spent all of phase B and most of phase CD fighting mass growth, even more so than most missions. We face a tougher thermal environment than most missions, not counting solar probe, and that was a huge issue, both at the proposal stage and throughout development. Because orbit insertion is difficult from the point of view of celestial mechanics, it meant that we had a complicated mission design. And like many planetary missions, specific launch windows. We were very fortunate in retrospect that the year we were aiming to launch had 3 windows of sufficient duration to be adequate for launch risk. They were not equally capable in terms of energetics and phase Z duration, but the fact that there were those 3 windows turned out to be very helpful to us. So, some more stories. I guess I'm going to start with saying the obvious, and you've been hearing this for a day and a half. And I'm directing almost all my remarks to PIs or PIs, hopefuls, or future PIs. rather than some of the colleagues of the PIs in this audience. You've heard enough about reserves to know that that is a mantra that you should repeat many times when you're going through your private thoughts. But the next one is a little less obvious, but for a PI-led mission, you have to know enough about what everybody on your team does to be able to judge how what they're telling you impacts the scientific return from your mission. Being a PI means a lot more than setting out to do a great scientific mission. It means, particularly throughout phases B and the early part of C, but also throughout E, there's endless trades that face you in terms of a trade against some spacecraft capability or some limitation on pointing or navigation or communication. That affects scientific return. Some aspect of scheduling that affects scientific return. Certainly some aspect of budget that affects scientific return. And you must know what the project manager knows, and you must know what the mission systems engineer knows, and you must know, at least at some level, what each of the subsystem lead engineers know. And most scientists going into a PI-led mission don't know those things, because there's not a good school to learn those things, and even this kind of exchange, however valuable, won't teach you those things. And so you either have to be a very quick learner, or you have to have had enough mission experience to have captured these things beforehand. But you must learn them, and you must learn them in time to optimize the scientific return from your mission. It also goes without saying you should have only terrific people on your team. That's very easy to say. What it means is, if you're a PI in charge of a PI-led mission, you must have the authority to change the people on your team. You must be able to say to your implementing organization, this person is not working out, find me a replacement, convince me that this is a good replacement. If you don't have that authority, you are not leading a PI-led mission. So you got to learn how to recognize who these people are, and you need the communication lines with your implementing organization so you can put those people into place. It's critical, absolutely critical. There's no single person that makes a mission happen. It's the whole team, and you need the best to get there. Finally, you probably heard this for a day and a half. Whatever you can get done in phase B, get it done, because it just gets harder after that. Okay, now, Noel said, tell some stories. I always listen to Noel. And most of the stories I'll talk about have to do with technical challenges, and some of the stories I'll talk about have to do with management challenges. And everybody's stories are going to be different. And the hope is that some of the stories we have on Messenger will help you guys to think through the different set of problems and stories that you're going to encounter. So this is two stories on one slide. A story about our solar arrays and a story about something called an inertial measurement unit. And one was a good story where we planned way ahead. And one was a pretty scary story where we almost got seriously burned. And the good story has some lessons for how to prepare for good stories, and the bad story doesn't have such a clear lesson. So, but they're still good stories. On solar arrays, this is a big challenge for us because of thermal design. We had to have solar arrays that would work at 11 suns at 0.3 AU. This was the single biggest technical issue that was raised the first time we proposed. It was the biggest technical issue raised in the first site visit that we had. And the fact that we didn't deal with that issue sufficiently well in the first site visit led to our not being selected the first time we proposed. So APL got the lesson from that exercise and put a lot of thought and effort into solar array design and a whole protocol for carrying through multiple vendors through a long testing program with a lot of validation steps to ensure that the final solar array was not only thoroughly tested but met all specifications and could be integrated in terms of all the pieces that go into a solar array. So the early engagement of multiple sources of solar array cells and substrates, a very thorough testing program, well thought through, a lot of contingency planning, depending on how the test turned out, and then a final vendor selection on the basis of this very large program of testing worked wonderfully to give us the solar arrays capabilities that met all of the specifications and all of the design constraints. So that was clearly a challenge the first time we had thought about a Mercury orbiter, but it was a challenge that was met by some very good engineering and a lot of thought given into how to come up with a design that would work and would be validated and would last over the lifetime of the mission. This other story is completely different. We needed very accurate navigation, and there was only one company, a sole source, that produced something called an inertial measurement unit that met the specifications for our mission. As it turned out, this same company was supplying an inertial measurement unit for deep impact, which, as I'd mentioned, was selected at the same time. So there were two discovery missions that at the same time were relying on a single vendor for a critical subsystem component. And those guys were the best in the world. It's kind of a black art to build these things with gyros and feedback systems. Nobody else knew how to do it as well, but it was a company that had a long track record. A small company with some very experienced workforce located outside of Santa Barbara. Well, it was bought by a larger company, as happens frequently in aerospace. And the larger company made a business decision, some guys sitting in who knows where, made a business decision that the small company that they had just bought would be relocated to a bigger facility near Los Angeles, in a part of Los Angeles. And for a Harvard MBA, that was a very sensible decision. However, the aerospace industry around Santa Barbara is a vibrant place. And any of you who lived in Santa Barbara and lived in LA might have a strong opinion about where you'd like to live. And it turned out that none of the key personnel who knew how to build these units wanted to move from Santa Barbara to Los Angeles. And so the big company found themselves with some contracts and requirements and delivery schedules, but none of the people who knew this black art about how to build these things were anymore in their company. They had to reinvent the expertise, and it was painful. That they had to go through a series of managers at the vice president level, each one of whom worked on the problem for a while and then was fired. They went through at least 3 vice presidents, this large company, which I will not name, before they finally got, very late in the process, an IMU system that came very close to meeting the specs and is now flying on Messenger and is still flying, I guess, on Deep Impact. So the lesson is that sole sourcing is dangerous. You can't avoid it all times. And the lesson is, see if you can protect yourself from the trends in the aerospace industry for bigger companies to grow at the expense of smaller companies. But you can't, in all times, have that kind of protection. So this is a kind of war story that I hope you don't face on your mission, but nearly brought down 2 missions. Okay, here's another. We had a very demanding schedule of what APL, the implementing organization, calls integration and testing. I think JPL calls it ATLO. But key to the Messenger mission's goal of minimizing the total dry mass that was launched was a thorough integration of the structure and the propulsion system. An early decision was made that the structure would be made out of composite materials. And up to that point, APL didn't have a lot of experience in using in building things with composite materials. And they went with a supplier, an expert supplier, a small company in California that was very good at that. But they had to deliver the structure to the propulsion subcontractor, who would then integrate the structure in the propulsion system and then deliver that integrated unit to APL for further integration of all the other subsystems and electronics and payload. So the whole integration system started with the structure. And the company that built our spacecraft structure had an earlier contract, something called MER. And they were late. They were really late. They were 4 months late. But they were a gorilla compared to a little discovery mission. And so we just had to wait. And it led to a late delivery of structure by 4 months. So it really constrained our scheduled reserve before we even began integration and testing at the level beyond structure and propulsion. And was probably the single issue that pushed us most far away from making the first of our 3 possible launch windows. So we started out in the hole. It took a long time to try to catch up. The lesson here, the lesson is try to avoid situations like we found ourselves in. But we were simply did not have the mission clout to affect the schedule on a much bigger NASA mission. Here's a couple more war stories that came a little later and also set us way back. Both manufacturing problems, one from an external provider and one from the implementing organization itself. These were also serious setbacks to our integration schedule. On the left, we had the situation that all but one of our payload instruments used a filter of a common design that was provided by an Asian manufacturer. And it seemed as though all the processes to check manufacturing and the characteristics of these filter boards was validated ahead of production. But when the units went through production, there was a problem with excess epoxy applied to a component on these boards. And it resulted in cracking and failure of the filter boards. And it wasn't, these were flight boards. This was not learned until the delivery of all these units. They had to be redone, and it came out of scheduled reserve very painfully. The problem on the right was a manufacturing problem with PC boards that had many, more than 10 conductive layers, these multi-layer boards. And it seemed to be a problem, although we don't know for sure, with the material that went in between the conducting layers. But what we discovered after production was that these boards delaminated in ways that you could see optically on inspection. And although they didn't develop to the stage where there were failures in the boards, the decision nonetheless was made to replace all the boards, redoing the process, different materials. 13 flight boards had to be replaced late in the business. So it was a painful story. It's one where attention to detail in manufacturing at all stages is clearly called for. Whether we could have avoided either of these 2 problems, I still don't know. But if you can avoid them, that would be good. See if you can. Management challenges. We had several kinds. Many of them came from NASA itself, but we had some internal ones. We, and I'm only talking about during phase B and CD, so we're talking about a 4.5-month period. The project manager that we started out with, who got our mission selected, who helped assemble the initial team, argued for the appointment of a deputy project manager with whom he could share some of the responsibilities of managing the team putting the mission together. What he didn't tell me until fairly late was that he was planning to hand over the reins to this deputy project manager sometime during phase CD. As a few of you in the room know, we had a pretty challenging second half to phase CD for a variety of reasons, only some of which have I alluded to here. Our project manager was informed by his physician that continuing as project management was detrimental to his health. You can imagine lots of ways that were so. In the case of our project manager, it was because he couldn't manage and not smoke. So he had to step down quickly, and the deputy project manager was named as the project manager designate. And I remember the last time that I had anything to do with this deputy project manager, we were at this company in California that was building the IMU. It was on a Friday. We were learning about the progress that the company was having on this inertial measurement unit. It wasn't a very good report. And we were facing the prospect that we would have a non-performing or non-conforming system. Anyway, the deputy project manager and I separately flew home, and next Monday he didn't report to work. And the day after that he didn't report to work, or the day after that, or ever. He never gave a reason. He never showed up back at the lab. Maybe he read the tea leaves about how difficult it would be arguing for additional resources from NASA headquarters. Maybe he didn't like making trips to Southern California. But what we found ourselves with was a situation where our project manager had to step down under orders from his doctor. We had no deputy project manager and no project manager designate all of a sudden, one Monday morning. And so APL, to their credit, with my frantic phone calls, helping to motivate them, came up with a solution. I said, I've got to have a new project manager. I've got to approve this project manager. Find me somebody good now. And they did, with Dave Grant, who turned out to be terrific. He was a project manager of the timed mission, which was doing well, and in its later stages, was willing to step up and take on Messenger on short notice. He had maybe 2 months of overlap with Max Peterson, who was a terrific project manager as well, but had to do what his doctor ordered. And so with very little change, opportunity to learn the mission, Dave just embraced it, took it on, and led us through the battles that followed, and those were some of them fairly fierce. So we survived, but I think it's likely we lost some time, and we lost a little bit of direction from the top. And so all I can say is try not to have this situation happen to you. You will have changes in your project manager, okay? Whoever is your project manager now won't be there at the end of your mission, almost surely. Now, a lot of you guys are going to planets that are easier to get to than orbiting Mercury, but even so, the length of time in phase B and phase CD, the length of your phase E will probably mean that you have a different project manager at the end than you started out with. Think about transitions. Think about the regular nurturing of potential project managers to be. By the way, we have a terrific project manager now, and Peter Bedini, who came on almost 3 years into phase E. And I'm very grateful for him, but he wasn't there at the beginning either. So probably your project manager won't be either.
Sean,
Anyway, there's a few other things
Sean,
here. Was there a question? Peter?
Yeah, I just thought this might be a good time to tell you, I went and saw my doctor the other day.
Oh, good. Stop right there. Anything more I do not want to hear? There's one more slide that elaborates a little bit more. The last half of our phase CD, in addition to having some interesting changes in management of Messenger, had some extraordinary changes in the management of the Discovery program. and I hope none of you guys face this, and probably not very many in the audience will remember it. Ken Ledbetter will remember it well, but not everybody here will. There was a lot of churn at many levels in NASA, at solar system exploration, now planetary exploration, but most importantly in the Discovery program. And the headquarters was trying to wrestle with the fact that several of the missions under the program were having simultaneous issues with schedule and cost, and we're trying to solve the problem with a variety of solutions of differing effectiveness, but all very short term. Let me show you in greater detail. When we were picked, there were what seemed to be a fairly stable management structure. The Discovery program was managed out of the NASA Management Office, which was set up at JPL with a Discovery Program Support Office. And this was the first Discovery Program Manager, and you see he lasted 4 years, which coincides with the first 4 years that we were involved. And then the program led to problems. There was a series of new individuals who had key administrative positions in the Solar System Exploration Division at NASA headquarters. There was a falling out between this individual and his boss at headquarters, and a variety of solutions, none of which lasted very long, was attempted. Taking the reins away from the NASA Management Office headquarters, gave it to a private corporation to manage the Discovery program. That lasted for about 6 months. Then for 7 months, NASA assigned the management to an implementing organization, JPL. JPL had been the geographic home of the NMO office, but had been administratively firewalled away. That firewall was gone here, and so APL was in the position of defending its management of a Discovery program mission to a program office that was themselves, some of you fine folks here are from JPL, writing proposals to the Discovery program to compete with APL. So it was a very awkward situation, a conflict of interest situation, and didn't work very well either. And finally, the month we launched, the Discovery program was happily assigned to Marshall. Happily, I say, because they've been terrific at managing the program as far as Messenger is concerned, in terms of assigning people who are helpful, knowledgeable, and have the best interests of the missions at heart. And that's been the case now for nearly 6 years. But when we were going through some of the most challenging technical and schedule issues in our phase CD, on top of that, we dealt with continuing change in personnel, meaning that not only were we educating new managers at headquarters in the Discovery Program Office, we were facing new sets of major issues, because each new set of managers brought in their own set of concerns, their own well-informed basis for deciding how missions should proceed and on what basis. So I suspect that we went through more reviews than you will face on your missions. I hope that is the case, because we very quickly lost count of our reviews. But each change of management meant that we got new reviews, and some of them were helpful, and some were time-consuming. Okay, but we made it through, and the Discovery Program Office is now in good shape. And just a few last words, titled, "We're from the Government and We're Here to Help." NASA's tolerance for what you can do and not do is going to change. It's going to change. We've seen huge sea changes on our watch, but it'll change again. And so you just expect that, and think about it as you proceed with your mission. Whatever you thought you would have in the way of reviews, you will have more. You will not have less. Nobody has less. You will have more. Okay, so the good reviews are places to learn things, because you have people who are expert, who come in and hopefully have some continuing dialogue with your project and learn enough about your project so that the next time they come as a review, they're informed, they're interested, they remember what they heard the last time, and they're very valuable sources of advice. It costs. It costs to have reviews. This is not to NASA right now, this is to the PIs. Make sure you get paid for all these reviews. Make sure that's in your budget, that you have a budget that can support everything that's going to be asked of you. And if you don't, ask for it. And finally, there's this horrible thing you probably all know about ITAR already. It doesn't seem to go away, despite the best interests of some of our friends in government. It was a giant headache for us. We had 6 major subsystems that came from non-US sources. Because they are the best suppliers of that stuff around, but it meant for a lot of extra headaches for the Messenger project to deal with it. It meant that there are headaches even when you have a science team meeting and you have non-US citizens because you have foreign co-Is, or even if you have, we started out with all American co-investigators on Messenger. We don't have it anymore. But they couldn't even bring all their students to a meeting because of ITAR rules. You probably all face this. It would be nice if Congress could amend the laws to be a little more lenient in the interpretation of ITAR with respect to space science, but it is a challenging area because of all the reasons that you understand in terms of the space setting for systems that legitimately belong under this legislation. Anyway, you've already figured out that it's also a news agency in Russia, but the bad ITAR doesn't have a logo, so that's why I picked that one. So that's all I have to say. I hope we can stimulate a discussion. I'm going to turn next to the third Messenger project manager, and the best one this week, Peter Bedini.